Get ready, it's time to be woke. Take off your shades, it helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we in the zone. We out here, yeah, spitting the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is Friday in most places. We're going to have some fun today, and we're going to learn at the same time. So not only will you watch our show and get in a better mood, you'll actually be smarter too, right? And not a lot of current shows can say that. And I speak from experience because my cup is empty. But regardless of that, I am going to introduce someone that you should really know. And that is Carrie Barber. Good morning, Carrie Barber.
Good morning, Andy. So happy to be here this Friday. Welcome, everyone. We've had a ton of new supporters and people who have signed on, and we really appreciate that. So if this is your first time, you're just hearing about us, we are live and interactive. So if you are watching us on our Twitter, Periscope, Facebook, YouTube channel, we will see those comments and we will respond. Be polite. Be polite. Don't type anything that your grandmother would disapprove of. Unless you're like my husband's grandmother, then forget that advice. But so welcome to everyone, especially our new viewers, because we've got a lot to talk about. There's some pretty serious things going on. And before we get started, I was telling Andy before we started this particular show, I spent a lot of time yesterday talking to veterans with PTSD. And these were military veterans and then a few from State Department, diplomats, things like that. We all have PTSD based on service that we, and our experiences. So when you're watching the news and you're seeing these images come through, particularly when you've got the National Guard and everybody kitted out, and the military vehicles in particular, the barricades going up. We've all seen this in foreign countries. It's extraordinarily rare to see it in the United States. And that is why a lot of people are having issues with PTSD right now. So the same advice I gave yesterday, I want to give to everyone here. Take care of each other. You have a plan. Work your plan, and that plan always starts with just breathe through it. Remember that what you're seeing on TV is not outside your door. It is not happening to you. You are going to be okay. You are going to be safe. And some of the rest of this, we'll get into the discussion about what's going to happen next and some very serious decisions that need to be made on a personal level for our MAGA neighbors. It's really on them how things go from here on out. So for you watching at home, wherever you are in the country, just breathe through it. We've seen this before. You are not specifically in the barricade. You are not guarding the fence. You are not the one who's standing there. And I know that where this comes from is a sense of empathy for brothers and sisters who are there right now. So just breathe through it. We're going to get through this. It'll be okay. Okay. So if you have a plan that it requires you to call and reach out to somebody, make sure you do that today. It's okay. These are serious issues. And in this particular time, it is okay to be afraid. It is okay to be fearful of what's going on. It is okay to have concern. That shows that you have empathy, that you're a real person, and that comes from a source of strength to face that. So I just want to pass that along to anybody who may be watching who's dealing with that kind of stress, panic attacks, things like that, where you're tensed. So make sure that you're breathing through it and you have your plan in place and you're working that plan. So that's my little PSA for everybody who happens to be watching today. Just try and take care of each other. But for the rest of us, we have some work to do today. So we're going to get through that. And I am going to post some links that go along with everything that we talk about. That's one of the things we're adamant about doing here. Is it's not just that we're trying to bring you honest information. It's that we want you to read it for yourselves. Critical thinking is a learned skill, and just like exercising at the gym, you get better at it the more you practice it. So let's make sure that we're all doing that. And if you see something in any of these articles, any of the source material that we've provided here that you disagree with, or you think we've got it wrong, feel free to weigh in on the chat and let's talk about it. Let's have that conversation. So, okay.
All right.
That was a long opener.
Yeah, I think
I need to breathe.
I think you need to take your own advice a little.
Right. So, yeah. So, I a part of my job doing investigative journalism is always to try to look at things objectively. Is what I believe true? And so in these days that have unfolded, I've always had kind of a periphery on what was going on the alt-right, but I didn't delve into it as much as I probably should have to understand it better. So I wanted to bring that experience into the program today. So this is where we're going to have some fun with words and terminology. So the alt-right is short for alternative right. This is the term coined by white supremacists, because what they have done is actually it's pretty smart marketing. Rather than going forward with, I'm a white supremacist, they coined the term alt-right to make it a little more palatable. So rather than getting shut down at the beginning, because we recognize, those of us who ever studied history, recognize where white supremacy leads. And this is not racism. This is people who are openly advocating for white supremacy to bring about more racism. Okay? So there are people on the right who are conservatives, some who are traditional conservatives, some who are more on the neocon, and then there's this whole new group that have surfaced and made them, they've had a complete effort to make this mainstream, to make this kind of hate and vitriol acceptable. And they've done a phenomenal job at it, because we see so many people now parroting some of their talking points and literally following them into the line of fire. So I go back to Sun Tzu, who in his Art of War, he always talked about know thy enemy. And I will want to differentiate between the enemy being a person and a behavior. So the behavior is what we're talking about today. I personally don't believe that anybody is too far gone to be pulled back. It may take longer to pull them back from this hate than it would someone else. But so this is why I want to focus on the behavior, not the individual. Does that make sense? Like, there's redemption for everybody. And that's just me.
This is kind of like confession. It's like confession.
Yeah, exactly. So this is why I personally am pro-life. We saw Trump administration yet again use the death penalty yesterday. So they don't believe in redemption. So there's your difference. There's your stark difference. Somebody can be rehabilitated or they can't. I believe they can. I'm pro-life. Trump administration is not. So they are more than happy to kill people as if a human life has no value. So there's your first difference. But so the first word that we want to get into today is a word that I was not familiar with, and it sounds like it comes from a children's book. This is the Groyper. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know if I've got it wrong. Tell me in the chat. But so this particular word, it was kind of new to me, so maybe you've seen it before. It's or Groypers, however you pronounce it. So Groypers, the loose group of white nationalist activists, provocateurs, and internet trolls. So we've all seen them. These are the ones, there are some that will come in and try to make a reasoned argument about being prideful about being white. Okay, whatever, you didn't choose to be white, you didn't choose your family. And there's a difference between like, I have a heritage that I am proud of, but it has nothing to do with me being white, right? So it goes back to basic biology in that for every difference you can find, I can find 100,000 reasons why you are identical to the person standing next to you who may not look like you, right? So they hold on to these superficial things because it comes from a place of insecurity and fear. So they try to take these superficial things to create the other and make themselves better based on no foundation of science or reason or logic. It's purely emotional, it's fear. So these Groypers, Groyper Army apparently is a loose group of white nationalists and far-right activists, internet trolls who are notable for their attempts to introduce far-right politics into the mainstream conservatism. So they rely on misinformation, logical fallacies, and other things to forward their narrative. And in the links that I posted, Andy, you remember that conversation we had about Operation Mockingbird and the way that marketing was manipulated from a psyops level?
Oh yeah,
when
absolutely.
I went through all, yeah. So when I went through all of these and their messaging and their logic and their baseline, the baseline way that they roll this out to the public to make it mainstream, it was almost identical to Operation Mockingbird, right? So here's a group that took their extremist ideology, their hate and their fear to a marketing campaign based on Operation Mockingbird and actually monetized it. So they are forwarding fear, insecurity, and all of these things to make money off of the results that they are able to achieve. Wow, that's amazing. So I know that we've gotten a number of people who were Trump supporters, consider themselves MAGA, maybe still are. And here is where I'm going to push back a little bit on you. We've seen you for the last 4 years call us sheep. We've seen you tell us that we need to think for ourselves. So today I invite you to take your own advice, go through the links that I've posted, maybe listen to a little bit of this conversation, and really consider your position today. Are these the things that you are okay with your grandchildren knowing about you? Would you be proud to stand in front of your grandmother and espouse these same ideas, right? Because I know most of us in this country are all immigrants. Either we're immigrants from first, second, third generation, or we go back even longer. Like my husband's family were here before the American Revolution, right? He comes from a long line of horse thieves and brigands, and they were shipped over as prisoners from the UK. Whereas my family came because of genocide from the British during the famine. So all of us at some point are immigrants here. And it doesn't matter what country you come from. This is part of the great experiment that is the United States, the melting pot, and that together we are better. So these Groypers apparently think that that is the wrong way, that everything in our history should not have happened that way. They believe that we should be, well, I hate to invoke the Nazi thing, but blonde hair, blue eyed, and way to go. Which ironically, most of these white nationalists are not blonde hair, blue eyed, and probably have a mixed bag in their genetic pool. So I don't really understand where they're coming from with this. It makes no sense.
Denial is a powerful drug.
And I think that's where we're at. right? So so when I was doing talks, particularly for Tea Party people and conservatives about Medicare for all, there was one note that I thought was interesting in all of this is the CDC years ago started tracking a new cause of death, and they called it the death of despair. And in this one, I thought it was very telling because you had two groups in particular that were the measure of this death of despair. On one end of the spectrum, you had in particular Black women, because the United States for a long time and still leads the world in mortality rates for Black women who are pregnant. Right, so that's one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the other group that was dying exponentially higher was white men middle age. And these are the 40 to 55-year-olds. And the reason they were dying was very similar to the Black mothers, is that rather than the lack of care and economic equality, in the white men's space, they were doing everything that they have been taught. They were following the rules. They were working hard. They were doing everything that they thought was necessary to achieve the American dream and still had not. So they themselves were feeling hopeless, fearful, and despair. So what they were doing was engaging in risky behavior like alcoholism and drugs. This is part of the opioid crisis, part of the addiction to alcohol, and then also full-on suicide. So with these two groups, the death of despair, you have an awesome opportunity for a grifter to come in and take advantage of these people. And this is a huge swath of the country that was ripe for being targeted with misinformation and lies. And the ultimate outcome of this for these grifters is financial gain and maybe a little access to power. So this again is part of that Operation Mockingbird. People are being manipulated because of the state that they're in, emotionally, physically, all of these things. They're being manipulated so that they will engage in behaviors that they would not ordinarily do. And Andy, like you said, denial. It's easier for me to look at somebody else as the cause of my suffering than it is to face the fact that everything that I have been told that I needed to do was a lie. Or that I have somehow failed, that I have failed to pull myself up by bootstraps. Therefore, I am less than, and I am the cause of my own suffering. When we know from the economics and economic policy, none of that is true. These are things that are still being outwardly done to us through uninformed policy and civic leaders who are economically illiterate, right?
Sure, and a lot of this has to do with the capitalist regime, neoliberal propaganda that Americans have been bombarded with for decades, right? Like, if you think about it, one of the biggest gaslighting points that's used by government officials or corporations in ads or whatever is un-American, right? As if America is a certain way of thinking, a certain set of standards. If you buck the trend or the establishment in any way, you are not American. You are against it. So if you are for helping people with policies like Medicare for all, that's un-American, right? If you take a knee during the anthem at a football game, that's un-American, right? And it's got such a foothold in the US, but it's at the same time such horse crap, if you think about what that actually means, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we saw that with the pictures that came back from the seditionists who raided the Capitol. They were all wearing American flag garb. And I kind of chuckle in a sad sense, Because when you read the code of the American flag, none of that is permissible. You're not supposed to have the American flag on a hat or a t-shirt or a bikini or on your paper plates for 4th of July. None of that is acceptable in the way that the code is written, but yet we focus on kneeling, which is permissible. So
Right.
it's again, that mockingbird kind of manipulation of the truth.
And there
The
was one
truth
other
is,
thing. I'm sorry for interrupting, Carrie, but there was one other
it's
thing that
okay.
I wanted to mention. And with the other social media platform that I work with, there's a number of people that are going to be in DC for inauguration to cover the events there, right? And so we had to go over a laundry list of things of them to not do to stay safe. And we saw the video of that a member of the press that was there covering, taking pictures, and the people that were there, the protesters were there, were convinced that he was Antifa simply because he was dressed in black, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about that, all right, there's no such thing as Antifa. Let's get that straight. But regardless, why would they assume that somebody dressed completely in black would be counter to who they were and needed to be removed, right? And you see all of these people dressed elaborately in red, white, and blue and big signs and everything. So it's an easy step for them to make to say, well, this person shouldn't be here. But I also find it very suspect that the reason that color would be chosen is because of, the potential ideology of these people, being racists, or at least being perceived as racist against black and brown people. So why somebody dressed all in black is that representative of something, right? I just found that was an interesting dynamic that was happening there, that they would choose someone dressed entirely in that color. So we had to make sure that our people going down there knew that and didn't show up completely dressed in black, right? Or they would, conceivably put themselves in danger, right?
Well, I was watching this morning, a comedian went down there with kind of the aim of being a Sacha Baron Cohen. And what they found was if they put on credentials for CNN, within minutes, they were getting cussed out. If they put on credentials that said Fox News, they were getting cussed out. If they put on credentials that had a neutral or obscure media thing, they were okay, but people wouldn't talk to them or were wary of them unless they were wearing some American flag garb or a red hat or something like that. So even not wearing the color black may not be enough to protect a journalist unless you can assimilate a little bit in your visual cues. So this is the level that we've gotten to with a lot of these people, and that also comes from fear. So there is no logic in a fear response, and we're seeing that over and over again. So yeah, what a place we've come to. All right, so Andy, let's get to the next word of the day: paleoconservatism. This one was interesting to me because you really have to twist yourself into a logical pretzel in order to make the case that you are some sort of paleoconservative. And there was one piece of this that I don't know that all of the MAGA people have really realized. A lot of the people who are making money and being elevated as personalities, the Michelle Malkins, and then this one guy that we're going to get into a little bit here, Nick, they describe themselves as paleoconservatives. This is also Alex Jones and some other folks. What's interesting is they are so far to the right on this whole ideology that they don't even want you to have bootstraps. So this is everything that happened because of the New Deal, all of those safety nets. This includes your Medicare, your Social Security, all of those programs, they want those gone. And we can see some of this in the evidence between state members, state representatives, and members of Congress that are being sent from particularly the right, the Republican Party, who are constantly trying to cut Social Security and Medicare. They also belong to this ideology. And to be fair, Joe Biden, how many times has said he's willing to cut those programs too? So it's an interesting dynamic when you have somebody like Joe Biden, who economically is siding with these people who consider themselves PaleoConservatives, further to the right than what they're calling the old right or the neoconservatives. So all of this is completely interesting from a intellectual point, but what we see in practice is downright terrifying. So I don't know
that's
how many.
completely not what I thought it was, because when you said that word, I just thought it was like a bunch of conservative paleontologists, which
that's what I thought too, because the word paleo, like the paleo diet and everything else, I'm like, what do you mean by paleo? And they mean going so far back that you can't even find this ideology in history. It does not exist anywhere except maybe in the Dark Ages. So real quick, I want to get to
brings a question. Are there keto conservatives, right?
Oh, I don't know. Yes, like the keto, the paleo diet, and the keto could be. I imagine you have just started one today that somebody will hear and go, that's a great idea.
Membership of what?
So there you go. That's all it takes. So real quick, I want to give a shout out to folks in our chat, particularly Bruce Deuce. He's new. So thank you, Bruce. Bruce says, people with power and stuff. Yo, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what we're talking about. And then Brandon weighed in, parroting incel dreams and nightmares. So Brandon is actually a member of our team. And if you haven't seen his program on Tuesday nights at 7, and then he just posted one last night. It was like Brandon thoughts on, I haven't watched it yet, but it's Brandon. So I'm sure it's pretty good. He was talking about the seditionists. And then Brandon says, Black Bloc is a tactic adopted by leftist protesters against fascist regimes to make it more difficult to single out individuals for attack. So all of these are, like I said, intellectually great things to read up on Black Bloc and how they work things. So intellectually, it's a great exercise, but seeing it in real life, kind of sucks. So the one that I want to get into, Andy, can we go to the video now? Because I think the video, this is a good place for the video to fit in before we get to DLive. So in this video, I pulled this off. This is MTV was releasing a segment, and there was this particular gentleman from Chicago who he has become an up-and-comer, and he is, for the longest time, he was one of those white nationalists who refused to admit that he was a white nationalist. He would say other things to kind of deflect and hide from it, because what they were trying to do is make this mainstream. So you can't go out there with this horrific ideology and be open and honest about it. So he and his fellow cohorts were trying to keep this quiet and package it in an acceptable manner so that Mr. and Mrs. White America suburbs would start to go, yeah, how come I can't be proud of being white? You know, that sort of thing. So build their following, and then also create xenophobia and distrust and racism off the chart. So what happened was he was followed around by a film crew for a while, and I don't know exactly what they told him they were going to do. There seems to be some dispute about it, but they actually sat him down at a restaurant with a reformed Ku Klux Klan member who had rejected that ideology and started to come back from it. So this, again, is why I say we look at the behavior, not the person. There's always redemption. So here's an example of somebody who was working on their own redemption, coming out of the Klan, And he was confronting this young kid out of Chicago who was trying to forward the white nationalist views. So I'm not going to discredit this particular individual, this kid, because he still lived at home and did all of these things, because right now, economically, most people still live with their parents. You can't do it any other way. But we do have to recognize that what we have been told since the 50s, when we stopped living at home longer, is that you are a failure if you live at home. So I can't help but think that part of this young person's ideology was that, number one, he came from a part of Illinois that was predominantly white, probably didn't have a whole lot of experience. And then because he still lived at home, could not afford things, that helped contribute to his insecurities that pushed him on this way. And then, of course, there's always the nurture part of it. What was around him? What were his parents saying? Whatever. So that's the setup for this video clip. And I want you to hear exactly what he says and what this older gentleman pushes back on, because I think he cuts through the bullshit pretty quickly. So take a listen.
You're saying now is the same we said. You guys are wearing suits. We wore robes.
Every other race can be proud to be who they are except for white people. Is that an illegitimate thing to believe?
When whites do it, it turns into a hate group. I have never met a guy that said white pride without him intending it to be racist.
What about me?
I think you have racist views, and I think you know you have racist.
What does racist mean to you?
It means you believe your race is superior over everybody else.
So a white supremacist.
Yeah, you.
I'm not a white supremacist.
Definitely are.
You
man.
sat here and asked me.
What you're doing is you're creating a movement of people that are white supremacists.
I'm not creating anything. I do a show on YouTube.
I see a lot of 1488s, man.
I can't control what people comment.
Why do you think that people are coming to you? Now, if you're saying you're not that type of person, then maybe you should start thinking about what you're saying, because these people think you are that type of person.
I don't know what the KKK says, but
I know what they say.
Okay, well, and let's say for the sake of argument.
I did 22 years. The you're saying is exactly the same.
originally started as a gaming space, but it quickly was overrun with these white supremacists and alt-right folks. So Parler is not the only place they went. When they did streaming, they did DLive. So Nick actually is one of the streamers on DLive. And what was interesting is during the January 6th events where the seditionists stormed the Capitol, you could see specifically where people were going, and they were going to streamers like Nick, who was at the Capitol openly encouraging sedition and all of these other things. So these neo-Nazis, and someone told me that neo-Nazis don't exist, and neo just means new. These are newfangled Nazis who are really not allied to anything other than being white and being violent. So that's where the neo-Nazi comes from. All of these people were streaming from the Capitol and encouraging the sedition and violence. So that's DLive. So I wanted to include that as another platform. So what is happening now is a lot of our MAGA folks who were at the Capitol and elsewhere who were supporting these narratives, they are all being rounded up and identified. Some are actually facing charges right now, but if you think that you are somehow anonymous, no, you are never anonymous when it comes to digital communication on the internet. Never. But those who thought they were, particularly on the DLive platforms, on Parler and everything else, you're getting a rude awakening now. And you're seeing exactly what everyone else has been telling you for quite a while. So, okay, so Christian I'm going to read your name wrong. I'm so sorry. Christian 4ERO says, I've had my 2.3 Bitcoin since 2006 for a video game to buy skins, and I'm not sure if I should sell it to Dogecoin to make more of a profit. What do you think? I have no idea, but wait till we get to what Bitcoin's doing. I think for legitimate purposes, maybe, and Andy's going to weigh in a little bit more on that. So, and then Brandon says, fascist incitement has turned into a violent game of I'm not touching you rhetoric, which facilitates plausible deniability when confronted. Well, Brandon, I'm going to get into that because that I hate to use the term noose, but the noose is getting tighter on a lot of these people. That this circle is shrinking, and we're seeing it in real time. So a lot of these people are going to start to panic, and their rhetoric will not save them in this. So one of the other links that we put in there was on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, for those who aren't familiar with it, and I'll admit I'm not an expert on Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is not anonymous either, because it has coding in there called the Block Australian white supremacists. We didn't see this coming. So this latest infusion seems to have come from France, but you can trade in international and then have one person purchase Bitcoin from France and then distribute to others. So this is interesting. And Andy, you and I were talking a little bit about Bitcoin and why this might appeal to lawlessness, white supremacists and alt-right groups.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's fairly new, right? When we talk about cryptocurrency, it hasn't really been around that long. And if you understand what it means and why it was brought into society and used as an investment tool, right? People think that Bitcoin can actually be used as its own currency, that it actually has value, right? But quite honestly, when you talk about Bitcoin, it's basically just denominated in US currency, right? Or wherever it is, whatever country it was generated in, right? So it's really only a pseudo investment tool. It really doesn't have any purchasing power per se, except for what its value is in terms of currency that is recognized as a currency in a country, right? The difference is why it would make sense that we would see Bitcoin being made as payment to people who want to remain anonymous is because it is a market that is currently unregulated. And if you've seen anything, or if you're a member of the cryptocurrency community, then you realize that there's currently a bill that's come into existence that's spearheaded by a number of economists and congresspersons. And the economist is Rowan Gray, who is an MMT economist who is associate professor on the West Coast and the president of the Modern Money Network. And he is the one that is helping craft this legislation. And basically it's to regulate the industry that is currently unregulated, right? And that's a big deal because it exists more in terms of the shadow banking world, in terms of the real banking world, right? In the same way that you have in the difference between the US currency and a cryptocurrency, right? So they're trying to regulate it so that it can't be used in this manner, right? So that it's not used to bilk investors or anything like that, because like any entity that is either banking or pseudo banking, it needs to be regulated. We've seen what happens when these types of industries are unregulated, and all you have to do is look at 2008, right? And so that's why this is significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, here it is right here. So the worst case scenario actually happens. So a little bit of regulation is not a bad thing, especially when you have so many people who are dipping into the market and don't have the leverage of somebody else with a big name and a following, whatever. The little guy is always going to lose out in some respect. So what regulation attempts to do is level the playing field and add some rigor around which it can and cannot do, because as we've seen, morality is kind of hit or miss with some folks. So they have no problem not only sending you into the line of fire, but taking your money while they do it. So,
well, that's the neoliberal philosophy, right? It's not doing things based on right and wrong. It's based on what can I get away with. Right.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Which is where we're at. So my final plea, and I feel like I'm running out of time because I can see things amping up. I feel like I'm running out of time to make this final plea to our MAGA folks. Like, I get that you're a Trump supporter. I get that you bought into all of these things. I get that there's nothing I can say or do to convince you to maybe take a look at some facts. I get that. The last thing that I want to point to is something that has never happened in my lifetime, and I cannot find an instance where this has happened before, is the statement that came out from from all of the military leaders. This was the memorandum from the Joint Force from the Pentagon. This is the head of, and I want to make sure I get these titles right, General of the U.S. Army, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chief of Staff of the Army, Commandant of the Marine Corps, Chief of Naval Operations, Chief Staff of the Air Force, Chief of Space Operations, and Chief of the National Guard Bureau. So this is all of them that head up all of our military forces, including the newest one, Space Force. Never in my lifetime have they ever issued a statement like this. Not as a joint, not as individuals, ever. So this to me is, this is the level of where we're at. And if you're not going to listen to anyone else, perhaps you will listen to these people, because in their statement, they were very clear about what their intent is next. Not only have we seen them issue the order for lethal force, this means live ammunition and shoot to kill. These are the orders that have gone out to the military personnel not only in DC, but surrounding the country when they are called out to defend against sedition in the states. They went that far and then identified who the enemy is. And I want you to pay particular attention to this, because on January 6th, we saw a lot of people in the crowd who said that they were fighting for the Constitution, that they were fighting for all of these things. And while you may believe that, no one else does, including these military officers, because he find exactly who the enemy is, that they take an oath to defend the Constitution, not what someone tells you it says, but what it actually says. And in this memorandum, they are also warning members of the military right now. If you are active duty, what they're telling you is, if you decide to follow the grifter, follow the seditionists, and do things outside of what you are sworn to do, then the people standing next to you, your brothers and sisters in arms, will turn their weapons against you. And for the majority of people who were in the crowd that day, they have never been in an armed conflict. They have never been fired upon. They have never lived through shelling. They have never had any of that happen before. And you could see it on their faces when the police were turning batons on them and things like that. It was shock and incredulousness. And then afterwards, people crying and whatever else. That was nothing compared to what is coming should you attempt to do this again. And this gentleman that I keep bringing up, Nick Fuentes, Michelle Milken, Alex Jones, all of these people, they are more than happy to send you to the front lines to face the consequences that they themselves will not face and are terrified themselves to face. They are more than happy to push you out to be cannon fodder while they continue to make money off of the things that they're saying. So I feel like this is the last opportunity I will personally get to beg you to consider your own words. Stop being sheep and think for yourselves. The US Constitution is online and has been for over 15 years. Please read it. Please read it and understand. If you have questions about the electoral process, there are plenty of resources to help you. If you want to send us a message, I will walk you through how the electoral process works. I will even personally go through your county and show you who your clerk was, which party they're aligned to, and who the election judges were that monitored and facilitated your own election. I will also help you find all of the 60 transcripts for the court cases that clearly show that Rudy Giuliani and Trump were lying, that they provided no information and no evidence to back up their assertions, that each one of those lawyers now is facing reprimand from their own bar so that they cannot participate in fraudulent lawsuits going forward. I will help you find all of that information, and I will find it from credible, reliable sources. But this whole idea that you're going to take over the government, if you will but read the Constitution and the laws outlined therein, even if you took out the entire Capitol and everyone in it, you cannot stop the government. And the reason for that is every one of those roles, every one of those seats has a line of succession going back 100,000 people. And the reason for that is we are the government. It is a government of the people. So you would have to go through 300 million people to stop the government. This is a fact. It's outlined in the Constitution. You should read it. By taking over a building, it means nothing. By taking out all 400 people in the House means nothing. We will replace them with new people from Democratic and Republican parties. That's how it works. So what you are asked to do right now, what they're telling you to do, is put your life on the line for their grift. You are not going to succeed in any of this. If you want to change the world and you want to change the government, learn how it works. That's why it's there for you. So it's the end of my rant, the end of my plea. boy, I hope some people listen, because this is just not going to go well.
Right. And I think that it's important to also realize that nobody really knows what's going on. We can't even pretend that we know the entire story about who is trying to do what, because we live in a time where people don't know who to trust, right? They don't necessarily trust their government. They definitely don't trust mainstream media, right? So are you being told the full story? And the answer, unfortunately, you have to assume is no, right? So it makes no sense, even as a citizen who typically goes to Washington to observe an inauguration, that for a number of reasons, including the fact that it's a pandemic, this is not a good year to go to the inauguration, right? Whether you believe that an attempted coup is possible or going to be attempted on that day or the day before, or whether you think it's performative art, if it's performative theater, and it's just a big show, right? It doesn't matter if the police that are there are armed with real bullets, because the bullet doesn't care. The bullet will tear through you and put you in a morgue. Is it worth it? No, of course not. You have to survive this. We have to come out the other side and pick up the pieces of whatever happened, right? Nobody can be deemed safe if they go. The only way you can stay safe and make yourself safe is if you don't go, right? It's not worth it.
Absolutely.
Your life's not worth it to find out in person.
And I just, going back to the whole PTSD and military service and all that. Now, I was personally not in the military service. I was with State Department. Not me personally. I was a teenager going through all of this. What I remember from that is when the shooting starts, when the shelling starts, it's always the person who speaks the loudest with the most romanticism about the purpose and how strong they are and what a great patriot they are. They're the first ones to fold, always, every time. They're the first ones who are down on the ground crying because they didn't realize what they were asking for. They didn't realize what was actually the reality of the situation that they themselves had set up. So I'm seeing it again, especially from this Nick Fuentes and Michelle and Alex Jones. Alex Jones wasn't up there. Nick wasn't up there. He was still on the stage, live streaming, encouraging everyone else. So yeah, Brandon, you're absolutely right. There's never any fascist leadership on the front lines of fascism. No, there sure aren't, but they're sure there to get their pockets full of the money that hardworking Americans cannot afford to get.
Sure,
So
and
all
it's
of
worth
this,
it. It's worth it for them to get people, riled up and do their dirty work if it means, likes and clicks and Patreon donations, right?
yeah, and that's all that it is to them. That's all that it is. You are nothing more than a like and a click and a donation. And this to me is the ultimate distraction from the things that are really going on when we're talking about okay, so next week we're definitely going to have to cover the Biden plan, because that to me again is ridiculously stupid and facilitates this anger and people acting out, right? So, that's coming. That's definitely out of here. I do want to make a shout out. So we have an interesting guest coming up Monday. This is a whistleblower in Wisconsin who he himself was in a juvenile detention facility, and he alleges that the kids in this facility were being gassed by the Wisconsin government and the private prison company that was holding them, and that practice still continued for quite a while. He became the whistleblower to make this known, and he's got some interesting stories to tell. So we definitely want to hear what he has to say and go through that conversation. This goes to the criminal justice system, to our for-profit prisons, and what the hell is going on in Wisconsin? What? So then I also have a report coming out specifically about Kenosha. So in my report, I maintain that everything that we're seeing from the police forces across the country comes from a lack of accountability. So from Bitcoin to the police force, we are not saying we hate police, most of us. We are saying we want the police to be well regulated so that it is not a bastion of white supremacy and corruption. And this is why I took a look at Kenosha, because things that are going on in Kenosha have been going on for quite some time and are getting worse. And there's a definite comparison between the Jacob Blake case and a case that happened earlier with a teenager, a young man named Michael Bell. So that happened in 2004. Jacob Blake happened in 2020. And the two cases to me are so starkly similar that in this 10-year period, you can see the gradual progression of corruption that is happening, not just in the Kenosha police force, but in the DA's office, and how it's being aided and abetted and all this complete shit show. So that's coming out next week. So stay tuned for that and look forward to your comments on that. So Andy, that's what I got for this morning. This is not our typical Friday free for all. So it's a little somber today. Got anything to cheer us up? I'm going to put you on the spot.
No, not a thing.
Okay.
Listen, you're asking somebody who's locked in their house for the next 4 weeks. Ontario went into lockdown. If you get in your vehicle and drive to any place other than a medical facility, a grocery store, or your place of work, you can get heavily fined. Right? So I'm stuck here for a little while.
All right. Well, everybody send your jokes and meme to Andy to cheer him up a little bit. It was kind of sad. I saw a news headline that Germany had hit their daily death total record of 1,200. And I went, oh, that sucks. Wait a second. U.S. said, hold my beer. We hit 4,000.
Yep.
4,000 per day. So, yeah. But Republicans are starting to wear their masks. So I guess that's a good thing.
Well, they finally realized that they can use them as billboards.
Yes, they did. And boy, are they. So, and the people, the same grifters who said it was a hoax are the first ones in line for the vaccine. So we keep getting screwed.
Yep.
Every which way. So
don't listen to what they say. Just watch what they do.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So, all right, Andy, hang
Let's
in there, buddy. Okay. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yep. Everyone take care. And we will see you bright and early on Monday morning. See you later.
Dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. What?